What if the monster you thought was dead and buried was actually living right next door, watching your every move? For 6 years, Eleanor Ainsworth had carefully rebuilt her life in the quiet town of Willow Creek, Oregon. A survivor of profound psychological abuse, she found peace working as a therapist, tending her garden, believing her manipulative ex-husband, Julian Croft, had died in prison 4 years prior, confirmed by an official letter. She finally felt safe, finally free. But her freedom was a devastating illusion. Julian Croft was very much alive. He had served his time, created a new identity, and for the last 2 years had been living as her quiet, unassuming neighbor, observing her life from the shadows. Have you ever felt truly safe, only to have that feeling shattered? Do you trust the systems designed to protect victims from those who wish them harm? The terrifying vulnerability for survivors doesn't always end with escape or incarceration. Sometimes bureaucratic failures, simple mistakes on paper, can reignite nightmares, placing danger closer than anyone could possibly conceive. How could such a catastrophic error occur? How long could Julian watch Eleanor, undetected, living just yards away? And what happens when the truth finally surfaces, shattering her hard-won peace? If you want to understand the chilling intersection of survival, deception, and systemic flaws, subscribe to True Crime Hunter right now and ring that notification bell. You won't believe how this story unfolds. Willow Creek offered Eleanor Ainsworth more than just a change of scenery. It offered a predictable cadence, a life lived on her own terms. Each morning began with a walk along the creek trail, the scent of damp earth grounding her before she opened her small private therapy practice downtown. The gentle chime of the bell above her office door signaled the start of days spent helping others, a quiet satisfaction replacing the constant anxiety that once defined her existence. Her cozy cottage, filled with books and the aroma of herbs drying in the kitchen, was her sanctuary, a space entirely her own. This hard-won tranquility stood in stark contrast to the suffocating control she had endured for years. Here, she decided her schedule, she managed her finances, she chose her friends. The oppressive weight of Julian's judgment was gone, replaced by the simple freedom to be herself. She had carefully integrated into the town's quiet life, known by the local bakery owner, exchanging pleasantries with clients on the street, offering a friendly wave to Mrs. Gable across the road as she watered her roses. It was a life built on routine and calm, a world away from the fear she had escaped, a world where she finally felt secure. The peace Eleanor knew now was built on the ruins of a life dominated by Julian Croft. His initial charm had been intoxicating, a magnetic pull that drew people in. But beneath the polished surface of the successful software architect lay a deep-seated need for absolute control. The relationship quickly became a cage, constructed with invisible bars of psychological manipulation. Julian was a master gaslighter, twisting reality until Eleanor questioned her own memory, her own sanity. "You're being too sensitive. That never happened. You must have misunderstood." Phrases that became the soundtrack to her diminishing self-worth. His control was pervasive. He monitored her phone calls, questioned her friendships relentlessly, subtly steering her away from anyone he perceived as a threat to his dominance. Finances became another weapon. He took complete control, doling out allowances, demanding explanations for every penny spent, making her feel dependent and powerless. Verbal assaults, often delivered with chilling calm, could strip her bare, leaving her feeling stupid, incompetent, and utterly alone. Physical intimidation was less frequent, but strategically deployed for maximum impact. A door slammed violently near her head during an argument. A grip on her arm just tight enough to leave unseen bruises, blocking her path in a doorway. These weren't acts of impulsive rage. They were calculated reminders of his physical power and her vulnerability. Living with Julian meant navigating a minefield of his moods, constantly vigilant, perpetually afraid of triggering his displeasure. The confident woman she once was slowly eroded, replaced by a shadow filled with self-doubt. Trapped in a cycle of fear she felt powerless to break. The breaking point for Eleanor wasn't a single dramatic event, but rather the culmination of years of suffocating control. A flicker of her former self ignited, fueled by sheer desperation. In hushed phone calls to a domestic violence hotline from a library computer, she began planning. Saving tiny amounts of cash, arranging for a place at a shelter miles away, gathering essential documents when Julian was preoccupied. Each secret action was fraught with terror. When Julian inevitably discovered her plan, his fury was explosive. The harassment escalated. He used his tech skills to track her movements, attempted to drain their remaining shared accounts, and bombarded her with threats. This final campaign of terror, combined with the documented history of abuse, finally led to his arrest. The legal battle was arduous, forcing Eleanor to recount years of trauma. But the evidence of stalking, financial malfeasance, and a pattern of coercive control was substantial. Julian Croft was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in state prison. Eleanor, finally free from his immediate grasp, moved across the country, changed her name back to Ainsworth, and began the long process of healing, eventually settling in Willow Creek. Then, 4 years ago, the letter arrived. Bearing the official seal of the Department of Corrections Victim Services, it stated plainly that inmate Julian Croft had died from complications following a respiratory infection. Eleanor sank onto her living room floor, the paper trembling in her hands. Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow, but of profound, almost suffocating relief. The final thread connecting her to that nightmare had been severed. What she couldn't know was the devastatingly simple mistake behind her liberation. Miles away, in another wing of the prison system, an inmate named Jason Kraft had died from pneumonia. A rushed data entry clerk, facing a backlog, accidentally linked the mortality report to Julian Croft's file. The automated victim notification system did the rest, dispatching the letter that gave Eleanor a freedom rooted in a fatal error. For her, the monster was gone. In reality, the system had merely lost track of him. Prison did nothing to reform Julian Croft. It merely refined his manipulative skills. He viewed his incarceration as Eleanor's fault, a gross injustice against him. His obsession with her didn't fade. It hardened into a cold, patient resolve, simmering beneath a carefully constructed facade of rehabilitation. He charmed guards, aced therapy sessions he privately mocked, and played the role of a model inmate focused on self-betterment, all while meticulously planning his eventual return to the life he felt Eleanor owed him. He learned the system, how to work it, how to appear compliant while nurturing his resentment. After serving 7 years, Julian walked out of Northgate Penitentiary. He wasn't rehabilitated. He was simply free, armed with the ultimate advantage. The world, specifically Eleanor, believed him dead. This anonymity was a powerful cloak. His first priority was finding her. Knowing she would have changed her name and moved far away, he began a methodical, patient search. Using burner laptops, encrypted connections, and public Wi-Fi hotspots, he scoured the digital landscape. The breakthrough came unexpectedly via a state professional licensing board database. Eleanor needed her therapy license to practice, and while her home address was protected, the business address for Ainsworth Therapy Services in Willow Creek, Oregon was listed. Cross-referencing this with town directories and online images confirmed it. He had found her. His plan wasn't immediate confrontation, it was infiltration. He needed to be close, to observe. He meticulously crafted the identity of David Peterson, a quiet, recently widowed accountant from the Midwest. He secured high-quality false documents, altered his voice slightly, grew a salt-and-pepper beard, and adopted glasses and an unassuming wardrobe. He even practiced a slight stoop, consciously burying the sharp, predatory energy he once projected. The transformation was calculated, designed to make him invisible, unremarkable. Julian, now fully inhabiting his David Peterson persona, monitored local real estate listings near Eleanor's cottage with obsessive patience. 6 months after confirming her location, fate, or perhaps just grim coincidence, presented the perfect opportunity. The small house directly adjacent to Eleanor's went up for sale after the elderly owner passed away. Acting swiftly through a shell corporation set up with his hidden funds, David Peterson made an immediate, generous cash offer. The transaction closed quickly, attracting little attention. He moved in with calculated quietness, his possessions sparse, fitting the image of a man downsizing after loss. He introduced himself briefly to a few neighbors, offering polite but reserved greetings. He spoke vaguely of his late wife, Martha, and his desire for solitude, joining the local birdwatching club to solidify his cover as a harmless retiree seeking quiet hobbies. To Eleanor, he was just Mr. Peterson, the new neighbor. She barely registered his arrival beyond a fleeting thought of sympathy for the quiet widower next door. Why would she look closer? Julian Croft was dead, buried in her mind by an official document. The man next door had a beard, glasses, carried himself differently, and seemed utterly unremarkable. Her brain, protected by the certainty of Julian's death and focused on her own peaceful routine, simply couldn't make, the connection. He was just background noise in her carefully reconstructed world. For 2 years, Julian lived a double life, separated from Eleanor by nothing more than a neatly trimmed hedge and her unwavering belief in his death. From behind his own curtains, he became a meticulous observer of her routines. He learned the exact time she left for her morning walk, the days she worked late at her practice, the evenings she sat reading on her porch swing, bathed in the soft glow of her lamp. He noted the cars of her occasional visitors, the rhythm of her quiet, predictable life, the life she had built without him. Inside his rented house, Julian felt a profound, twisted sense of satisfaction. This hidden proximity, this secret knowledge, was a form of control more potent than any overt act. He was the ghost at her feast, unseen, unheard, yet ever present. He savored the power imbalance, the fact that he held this monumental truth while she moved through her days in blissful ignorance. He was patient. He hadn't decided his endgame. Perhaps he'd reveal himself when it would cause maximum devastation. Perhaps he'd subtly interfere in her life, or perhaps just watching was enough for now. The power was in the potential. There were fleeting moments, tiny flickers in the periphery, that could have shattered the illusion. Once, while gardening, Eleanor heard a low chuckle from the next yard as Mr. Peterson spoke on the phone, a sound that echoed a familiar cadence, making her pause for a split second before dismissing it as coincidence. Another time, seeing him walk away down the street, the set of his shoulders seemed jarringly familiar, a ghost of a memory she couldn't quite place, quickly pushed aside. Julian was dead. These were just tricks of the mind, echoes in an empty chamber. For 730 days, the predator lived beside his prey, separated only by a hedge and a lie she believed with all her soul. Living next to a secret can be terrifying. Can you imagine the psychological toll? Hit that like button if you agree this setup is chillingly effective. After 2 years of quiet coexistence, tiny cracks began to appear in the foundation of Eleanor's certainty, though she didn't consciously recognize them as such. One afternoon, while retrieving her mail at the same time as Mr. Peterson, he made an offhand comment about the unseasonably warm weather, ending with a peculiar phrase, "Just nature's little joke, I suppose." It was a phrase Julian used constantly, dripping with condescension. Eleanor felt a strange jolt, a dissonance she couldn't place, but quickly brushed it off. People used similar expressions all the time. A few weeks later, while tending her herbs near the property line, she saw him through the hedge, reading on his porch. He reached up and adjusted his glasses with a distinctive two-fingered push at the bridge, a small, idiosyncratic gesture identical to one Julian always made when deep in thought. Again, a flicker of unease, a sense of misplaced familiarity. But it was fleeting. Lots of people wear glasses, she told herself. Julian is dead. One evening, a news report detailed administrative errors within the state prison system, leading to wrongful release notifications. A cold knot formed briefly in Eleanor's stomach as she remembered the official letter about Julian, but she quickly pushed the thought away. It was a different state, a different situation. Her notification was years ago. It was definitive. Later that week, a therapy client spoke about the profound disorientation of discovering a long-term deception by a loved one. Eleanor felt an unusual wave of empathy, a vague, unsettling feeling she attributed merely to professional connection, yet it lingered longer than usual. Each instance was a tiny pinprick, easily ignored on its own, but subconsciously the questions were starting to form, even if her conscious mind refused to acknowledge them. The fragile wall protecting Eleanor's peace finally crumbled on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Casually browsing the Willow Creek community website, looking for details about an upcoming town event, she clicked on a link to the local birdwatching club's page, curious about their recent activities. A gallery showcased photos from their latest outing to a nearby nature reserve. She scrolled idly through images of members posing with binoculars, smiling amidst the trees. Then she stopped. Cold. There, in a group shot, stood Mr. Peterson. But in this photo, something was different. Perhaps it was the bright, direct sunlight hitting his face at an odd angle, or maybe he'd momentarily pushed his glasses up onto his forehead. The usual camouflage of the beard and spectacles seemed less effective. Eleanor leaned closer to the screen, her breath catching in her throat. Beneath the salt and pepper beard, the set of the jawline was suddenly, undeniably familiar. The eyes, squinting slightly against the sun, held an intensity she hadn't seen in years, but recognized instantly. It was Julian. A wave of icy dread washed over her, so intense it felt like nausea. Her hands began to tremble. The offhand comment, the familiar gesture with the glasses, the fleeting unease during the news report, fragments she had dismissed slammed into her consciousness, forming a horrifying, undeniable picture. The man next door wasn't David Peterson, the grieving widower. He was Julian Croft, her ex-husband, the man officially declared dead 4 years ago. He was alive. He was here, living beside her, watching her. The carefully constructed reality of her safe life in Willow Creek shattered into a million terrifying pieces. The monster wasn't just real. He was her neighbor. Eleanor recoiled from the laptop screen as if burned, stumbling backward until her legs hit her chair. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Pure, unadulterated terror seized her, cold and paralyzing. Her first instinct was primal: secure the perimeter. She scrambled through her small cottage, hands shaking violently as she checked the locks on the doors, bolted the windows, and drew every curtain, plunging the cozy space into near darkness. The sanctuary had instantly become a potential trap. Her mind raced, caught between the overwhelming urge to grab her keys and flee Willow Creek without looking back, and the paralyzing fear that he might see her, might know she knew. Where could she even go? He had found her once. He could find her again. The feeling of safety she had cherished for years evaporated, replaced by the chilling realization that she had been living under his unseen observation for 2 years. Needing absolute certainty, despite the gut-wrenching recognition, she forced her trembling fingers back to the keyboard. With frantic keystrokes, she searched the state's Department of Corrections inmate locator database, this time using Julian Croft's real name. The result appeared almost instantly. Julian Croft. Status: released. Parole date: just over 2 years ago. The final, sickening confirmation landed like a physical blow. He wasn't just alive. The system knew he was alive. The letter she received had been a lie. The paralysis of fear gave way to a surge of adrenaline-fueled clarity. Eleanor knew she couldn't stay hidden. She had to act. Her first call was not to 911, she feared alerting him, but to the domestic violence hotline that had helped her escape years ago. They quickly connected her with local advocates and advised her on contacting the police safely. With trembling resolve, she made the call, explaining the situation with as much calm as she could muster, referencing Julian's parole status and the false identity. The police response was swift and discreet. Officers approached the house next door under the guise of a routine inquiry. When confronted, Julian Croft, alias David Peterson, initially attempted to maintain his facade, expressing confusion. But presented with the evidence of his true identity and parole status, his composure cracked. The quiet retiree vanished, replaced by the cold, defiant anger Eleanor remembered all too well. He was arrested without significant incident, the mask finally ripped away. The legal consequences were immediate. Julian faced charges for parole violations, fraud related to his false identity, and potentially new stalking charges based on his 2 years of hidden proximity. For Eleanor, the arrest was just the beginning of another difficult journey. Supported by advocates and her own therapeutic training, she began processing the profound violation and trauma. The future of her life in Willow Creek, once a symbol of safety, now felt uncertain, but she faced it with the hard-won strength of a survivor determined not to let him win.